Welcome to Rappler Talk. I'm Natasha Gutierrez. Today, I'm with the Ateneo School of Government Dean Ronald Mendoza, who is here to speak to us about why ASEAN matters and why we should care about the integration. Thank you for speaking to us, Dean Mendoza.
Good morning.
So the Philippines is hosting ASEAN this year, and this year ASEAN is celebrating its 50th anniversary. But unfortunately, a lot of Filipinos still don't understand why ASEAN and its integration is important. So we're very happy to have you here. And we'll start the interview by first asking you, what are you most excited about when it comes to ASEAN integration and its economic community?
Well, I think there's many reasons to be excited about ASEAN. And I think they go back to why we actually pursued this level of collaboration and integration with these other countries that are in our neighborhood. And I think they all have to do with common good as far as the ASEAN economies are concerned. What are the things that we can build on that actually benefit all our countries, all our economies, all our societies? That we're a lot stronger together than we are individually. And that a more regional approach actually benefits many more of our firms, many more of our SMEs, many more of our consumers, many more of our workers, rather than if we pursued many of these public policy goals on our own. So I think more specifically in terms of trade and investments, there's a lot of bullishness in ASEAN. The often cited statistics is that NAFTA, United States, Canada, and Mexico is a market of about 400 million or so. European Union is a market of about 500 million consumers. But ASEAN is a market of more than 600 million consumers. So it's potentially the biggest trading and investment bloc if we are able to form it as such in the world. ASEAN is also at the heart of the Asian production systems, the international value chains that are now basically at the heart of global manufacturing and to some extent also technology transfer and technology catch-up. So if you look at ASEAN in this way, we are very, very strategically located, and the Philippines in particular is at the heart of this. So I think these are the areas that really give me a lot of optimism as far as ASEAN is concerned. If you listen to our firms, and probably this is for the first time in their history, they're already flexing their muscles in ASEAN and looking to invest in other ASEAN economies. You have groups like Ayala investing in places like the Mekong and places like Indonesia, Malaysia, or looking to invest at least. The other conglomerates in the Philippines are also pretty much pursuing the same strategy, looking at these markets, looking at the emerging middle class in ASEAN. ASEAN is a very fast-growing economy, and usually when you have fast-growing economies with high inclusiveness, what you're producing is a very strong middle class and a latent consumer base for more exports and also more production, right? So I think if you look at those areas, there's a lot to be optimistic about. There's also a lot to be cautious about in ASEAN, and I guess that sort of balances opportunities and challenges in a way. We have security issues that we need to look at, and we have international cooperation issues in maritime sector, management of natural resources. One example is the Coral Triangle, which I do research on in terms of the blue economy. The Coral Triangle is a concentration of the world's biodiversity. It's said by scientists to contain about 70% of the world's maritime biodiversity. And 70% of the Coral Triangle is actually located in Philippine territory. Wow. 20% of this is located in Indonesia, and 10% is located in Malaysia. So if you look at just the Coral Triangle, which is a big, big part of the world's biodiversity, we're not even talking about just Asia, right? It's the global biodiversity. There's such a richness in natural resources that the world has de facto left us in charge of. And the way that we can do this more sustainably is to cooperate with other countries. So we may have the 70, Indonesia may have the 20, and Malaysia may have the 10%. But we are collectively sort of responsible for this, not just for our own citizens, but for the rest of the world. If we mismanage this, there will be implications not just for these countries, the three countries I mentioned, but for the rest of the global community. So I think these are classic examples of regional public goods, which we do a lot of research on in the different multilateral forums, right? Regional public goods are common goods for a group of countries, not necessarily the entire world. If it were the world, then it's a global public good, right? But the regional public goods offer a big challenge to these regions, to these groups of countries, in that they need to find ways to cooperate in a sustainable way so that it doesn't just benefit the region, it also benefits the rest of the world.
So these are the sort of challenges that also come with this sort of ASEAN integration.
Yes.
Okay. How then would you propose that these countries would work together in a wide field, a wide array of fields, given how diverse these countries are? It's very well known that ASEAN, from one country to another, is very diverse in culture, in language, in religions. So how would ASEAN work together to kind of reach its highest potential?
Well, I think there's an outward approach to this and an inward approach, and I'll focus on the outward first. Basically, that's foreign policy for our respective countries, and foreign policy must now be sharper, updated with the latest science and evidence, and guided by the science and evidence, so that we see how the opportunities and the options for us to collaborate in a more sustainable way, in a more fair way. And I think that's been the hallmark of successful regional cooperation in other parts of the world, where they try to manage shared natural resources. The more you know about the natural resource, the more you empower your scientists, the people who generate your evidence, the more you guide your policy with this evidence and with this science, the more likely it's going to be fair, the more likely it's going to be sustainable, the more likely people will understand that it's based on something that's closer to true rather than closer to conjecture. So I think in terms of our foreign policy, this is what the meetings in Manila are all about. And it's good that we are holding these meetings. These usually cap a series of sub-meetings that take place before the bigger summit. So the summit is really just a way to put an emphasis on many discussions that happened way in advance. Mm-hmm. So kudos to all the diplomats, kudos to all the technocrats, kudos to all the scientists who have been feeding into the process that will culminate in this summit. So our leaders will then just look at all of what has been put together by our best and brightest in our respective countries, and hopefully put the political will behind the actions that we will then need to take moving forward, ranging from cooperation in investments, to trade, to small and medium scale enterprises, to movement of natural people, and all of this, right? So that's the outward approach. Then there's also an inward approach. So your question was, how do you exactly increase the chances of successful cooperation, around these very challenging issues? So you have strong evidence-based foreign policy. You also look inward and communicate these shared goals with your citizens, and build the ties that will eventually constitute part of what binds us together as essentially nationals in ASEAN, right? And maybe one day there will be an ASEAN citizen, right? But in the beginning, what we're trying to do is really just put together the links. Some of the links are cultural. Something as basic as Indonesians and Singaporeans watching our telenovelas could also be a way for us to convey some of what we value and some of what we believe in. And then export of products and services, trade and tourism. If you visit other countries and if you make friends with those people that you meet there, if young people study in each other's countries and move across borders, they will form ties that will last maybe their professional careers. And in the future, who knows, you may be on the opposite ends of a negotiating table crafting our trade policy, crafting our maritime policy, because you both went to the same school of government here in Ateneo, or you went to the same school of public policy in Singapore, or you went to the same business school in Malaysia, or you conducted collaborative research in Bangkok and worked together. These are the ties that actually bind us, that will continue to bind us. Beyond pieces of paper and signed treaties, it's people that will actually build ASEAN. And so this is the inward-looking part. It sounds odd to call that inward-looking because actually you want to establish ties. But what you're essentially doing is trying to build the argument to your own citizens, especially those who are unable to move borders, that it is in our interest to see the common good and not just our own national good. More importantly, to see the national good intertwined with the common good in the region, that we cannot go on this alone. Yeah. If we do, we will probably not extract the same benefits and success that we would if we were to go for these goals together. Things like cooperation in the maritime economy, things like cooperation in national security, things like cooperation in international trade, promoting poverty reduction, promoting international competitiveness. In a way, we're catching up with reality because our own firms are already building international production chains across Asia and ASEAN. So they already see the shared value in those chains. Otherwise, they would not have formed them. And they care about what happens to the Vietnamese economy. They care about what happens to the Malaysian economy because that's where their operations are tied, right? Malaysians who have invested in the Philippines are the same. Indonesians who have invested in the Philippines are the same. So we have a shared future and a sense of a common good on many areas, many fronts. And this, I think, is what we will build, looking outward and looking inward.
Great. So you talked about common good and more benefits for the people. Let's talk more about that. How are actual Filipino citizens going to benefit from this? You mentioned companies investing here, foreign companies, and obviously that also opens up jobs, and that is obviously beneficial for us. But how, you had mentioned poverty reduction as well, how would an ASEAN integration affect poverty reduction or perhaps more to the core cost of living for Filipinos?
Right. Well, there are at least two ways that I see. One way is through lowering the prices of goods and services that we all want to consume, right? And if you're producing this domestically, that may not necessarily be the cheapest option for the value that you want, right? And if we open up our borders to trade, this is a possibility for us to actually lower some of the costs that we are faced with. And in a way, what we're doing here is increasing the purchasing power of our population. I'll give you a very basic example. Rice from Thailand and Vietnam, right? Very contentious issue in the Philippines. Many of our politicians feel fiercely that they want our country to consume our own, self-produced rice. But the reality for our country is that it's been historically very, very expensive to produce our own rice, and the policies that have been geared towards this kind of a strategy have been fraught with governance challenges and corruption, right? So we spend billions, in fact, maybe even trillions over decades trying to be rice self-sufficient because of a sense of
nationalism, pride.
Well, if you had a sense of nationalism, I think the first thing you want to prioritize is to reduce poverty. So if you see that the policy is not reducing poverty, then I don't see how you can claim you're a nationalist, right? You're benefiting a small group of farmers, but if you talk to those farmers, you will also find out that they have a bump up in their standard of living, but they don't really break through to the next level of income to become what they aspire to be, which is to be middle income, right? There's no way they're going to be middle income in a product that is already seen to be uncompetitive with the other economies that are producing that product at a much lower price. And so we choose to, in the words of the philosophical economists way before us, we choose to put rocks in our ports, in our to block trade, rather than to benefit from this trade and then strategize towards products that will then increase the incomes of our farmers to a level which they really aspire to. No one wants to be dependent on state subsidies. No one wants to be dependent on help from the government, help from your fellow citizens. No one wants to be accused that you are only able to earn your living because we are subsidizing your activity. So this is one of the policy conundrums that our generation has to disentangle and get rid of this false sense of pride that we want to be rice self-sufficient. We don't want to open the borders to total importation of rice. We probably want something that's midway, a middle ground, right? So we don't want full open trade on this product because we do know we want some degree of self-sufficiency, because we don't want to be open to the vagaries of the international rice market, which can bump, the prices can bump up and down. On the other hand, we don't want to be 100% self-sufficient because it's so expensive. We're not lifting any of our farmers really out of the low income level that they are in. And essentially what we're doing is penalizing consumers and taxpayers with this strategy over time. The taxpayers pay for it, the very expensive corruption-filled strategy, and the consumers also pay for it because the strategy doesn't work. It doesn't decrease the price of rice. So many families remain hungry. Many families remain in poverty. Long story short, here comes ASEAN. You have countries like Thailand and Vietnam that can produce rice. And it's not just any rice, no? It's cheaper rice and higher quality rice.
For cheaper.
For a lower cost. I mean, there's really no way you can lose with this. We're not going to import 100% of this. We want something pragmatic, something like what the Malaysians are doing, like a 70% import rule. We import 70%. We have a buffer stock in the country so that if there's a price shock, we can mitigate the impact of this price shock. But we allow for the importation of around 30% of the rice, so that on average we'll have a lower price of this particularly important food source for our population. The impact of this is that we're essentially lowering the tax burden so we can invest it in other things, like truly strengthening our farmers to become productive in that other thing that we can send to the Thais and the Vietnamese, right? And
where we
earn
can
them.
be competitive.
Where we can be competitive. And there are many things we can be competitive in, right? Without distorting that with subsidies that force us into certain sectors that are not competitive, right? And so it lowers the tax pressure, or if the taxes remain the same, you can actually invest it in other things that will yield more for our country. It increases the purchasing power of our consumers. So the way I communicated this to our politicians is essentially it's sort of a pay increase for our workers. You did not need to lift a single finger on every firm and every owner of an enterprise. You did not need to increase their incomes, which is typically the pressure, right, for workers. They'll have an across-the-board increase in their purchasing power.
Just because the goods are cheaper.
Exactly.
Okay.
And if you think about, this is just one example, rice. There are many other things that we can trade with within ASEAN where the other countries will actually be better than us. We can even bring products that are not necessarily produced in the country or don't even grow in the country, which will again elevate the standard of living in the Philippines. I realize I'm a little bit older than you. When I was young, every Christmas time we would go to Cubao and buy apples there. Apples which were imported from the United States. And the apples were so expensive during those times that it was a treat, to eat an apple which doesn't grow in the Philippines. I was probably around 7 or 8 years old then. And now the apples you see in your grocery store are cheaper than our own mangoes, no? Things that our population was not able to eat before, or was only able to afford, or only able to consume at a very high price. Now we're able to bring these products in, right? And it is something that is underestimated as far as elevating the standard of living of our country.
It's almost like a quality of living increase.
Exactly. We have more options, we have more choices. Um, we are part of the global economy, and we can tell our citizens that you are not wanting for options that other citizens are facing also. So these are, of course, we're so far away from that still. No, we could still improve, but these are the things that we should also not discount. So there's an overemphasis on producing, right? Which is also good, that we produce things that get exported abroad, get consumed domestically. But also in those things that we are not good at producing, and if we bring it to our shores, that also elevates, the quality of life for our people. And the fact that every Filipino citizen can go there and consume it and not just dream it, he's looking at it in the movies or in TV and never really tasted what that thing tastes like or experience what that thing, is really like. Our young people are able to experience going to ancient sites in Myanmar and Cambodia and going to school in places in Singapore and Indonesia, and making friends not just with Filipinos but with many other nationalities of many other religions that will hopefully make the next generation a lot more open-minded and stronger than this one. They will be much more capable than ours will ever be because of the limitations of what we grew up with. So this, I think, is what we're building here. It's not just trade in rice, although that in itself will be very, very important. It's when you open up to something like this, and if you have a vision of what that will do to your population, especially the young people, it's going to make them a lot stronger. And that's really what we aspire for.
Great. So we talked about how something that seems so lofty or I guess political in a sense when you look at it actually matters to us, right? You talked about a cost of living, quality of life. And then you mentioned travel. Let's talk about travel. How would integration help millennials or the younger generation travel more?
Well, not just millennials, no, but also the pre-millennials.
Cheaper and better travel for all. Okay.
I think there are many discussions in the tourism industry, and they're now realizing that the selling point for our part of the world is not really even just an island per island sort of experience or a nation by nation experience either, but a multi-nation experience where if you go here, you spend a week, 2 weeks, you can actually experience several
6
countries,
countries,
exactly, several islands, several vibrant cities, and many of the things they have to offer at rates that are now quite affordable for a bigger group of people, even our own Filipino citizens, right? So you see this, and I think it's a generation that will be much more empowered in terms of looking at the world in a different way. A younger generation which will experience, nung bata ako kasi, you would just go to Batangas and that was your vacation, or the in thing would be, and it would be the sort of expensive vacation would be to go to Hong Kong, right? But now you have so many more options. I'm told by the young people that it's now boring to go to Hong Kong. You have to go to exciting,
Myanmar,
exactly,
Cambodia.
ancient sites where you can learn a lot more history, part of what formed Asia, and what is the background of other countries. You pick up a lot more. So I think that's a great thing, and tourism is probably one of those ways that we are going to rapidly put together that ASEAN spirit or ASEAN sense of common good, because as you have more and more young people sort of with this background, and they become part of the voting population, or they become part of your leadership as a country, that forms the basis for thinking differently. Much more differently than a previous generation, which was largely disconnected. You'll have people communicating to their fellow citizens these experiences, these views, especially those citizens who have not been able to experience them yet, or simply still aspire towards them but don't yet have them, right? So I think tourism is not just a revenue story for the Philippines. Tourism is also part of our vision of how integrated we are, not just with ASEAN, but the rest of the world. Welcoming our own tourists here, but also our own citizens and young people going to other places and bringing back those ideas and expectations, which will hopefully percolate into our political system.
Okay.
You can see how things work in another country. You can see how things can be made better. You can see the role of technology and education in basically making countries what they are. You can also appreciate how far we have gone relative to the challenges of other countries.
When you see, yes.
When you see what they're up against, and you see your common aspiration, right? So I'm very hopeful that this is part of doesn't get communicated too much in tourism policy making, but I think it's also going to be part of our soft power as a country, welcoming them here, coherent with our soft power coming from OFWs and the reputation that they build of Philippine ingenuity and skill. It's the same as far as our tourism industry is concerned, I think.
Okay, you talked about OFWs, and you talked about how beneficial it is to be able to change ideas even just in travel. Let's go a step further. Let's think long term. How about living abroad, working abroad, studying abroad? How feasible is this in ASEAN, and what are the challenges? Because this is something that's very exciting, I think, for the younger generations to be able to work abroad, to be able to study abroad.
Yeah. Speaking as a former OFW myself, I lived abroad for 15 years. I studied abroad, worked abroad, not in ASEAN, but more developed country.
Right, although, with countries that are traditionally, let's say, the United States, it's becoming harder, let's say, for Filipinos to work there. So perhaps the more important it is to develop an ASEAN opportunity.
Yeah, you're right. And in fact, this is an unfortunate byproduct of the lack of inclusiveness of some of this integration, right? Which is also the challenging part of this project. But if it's living abroad and sort of working abroad, I think that's already happening. Whether or not we have ASEAN, our nationals are finding their way into other countries. I'm told that there is a very big group of teachers, for instance, in places like Myanmar,
Yes.
and
Even
Cambodia
and Filipinos, yeah.
and Indonesia. There's a very big group of managers in conglomerates in places like Vietnam and Indonesia. And of course, there are many OFWs also in various parts of ASEAN and the world, right? What are the prospects for this? I think it's part of the integration story. And in fact, this is one of those things where I think integration is catching up with reality. Our people are already there, but they're not so well protected. Their well-being, their healthcare, their future after that piece of work that they do there, what do they do next? Their movement across borders, I think is all part of what we may begin to sharpen and rationalize now that we are integrating more formally, and the policies and aspirations are catching up with people who have already started to move, right?
Okay.
I think in terms of our country, welcoming people with the capability to contribute to our competitiveness and the capability to make our country stronger, we have a long way to go and a lot of openness to demonstrate in ways that should make us much, much more, how shall I say this? Our people are in other countries and require the help of foreign governments to protect them and to sort of take care of them also, right? When they need that protection and help. On the other hand, they contribute heavily to the economic growth and the dynamism of those economies. So it's only right that maybe we have some collaboration with those governments that can protect them. I think our standing in the international community and our voice in this area will be a lot stronger if we demonstrate some of that foresight, some of that vision, that we protect people who come to our borders to work here, or people who come to our borders because they are being persecuted in other places. And I think it is coherent with what really makes the Philippines, because historically we have been a very, very open
Hospitable
country.
country. Mhm.
Yes, sometimes to our own detriment. But it need not be. No, we can have good policies that make this a little bit more formal, but at the same time send a signal to the rest of the world that yes, this is a strategic part of our development, and it is part of who we are. That we welcome tourists, we welcome people who have a capability to contribute to our economy, and we offer that here. We also welcome investors who want to increase our productivity, create jobs, and help us reduce poverty, right? So I think there we still have a ways to go. We have so many protections, so much friction. I have many friends who are working in the expatriate community, or part of the expatriate community, who very silently sort of, complain to me, grumble to me that our government is not necessarily friendly to many of these workers, that they really have important skills that they contribute to us. So I think we can do a better job in that front. As for the rest of ASEAN, I think this is what these meetings are for, and surely the movement of natural persons is one area where the Philippines is set to gain very, very significantly if they recognize our medical practitioners, if they recognize our dentists, if they recognize our lawyers and accountants. I think we can help them in terms of skills that their countries don't necessarily have yet in large numbers. On the other hand, they can give jobs to many of our people. And of course, those people may come back to us with international experience that will make us strong again, contributing to our development. But I think this is part of the cycle of development of countries, much the same way that Japan sent out many foreign workers to places like the United States, Hawaii, and all that. South Korea did the same thing, and now South Korea and Japan are bringing back their nationals and then offering them jobs in the domestic economy. So I think maybe at some point the Philippines will hit that part of the cycle too. We need to bring some of our managers back, our skilled people back, and we are able to pay them the wages that they really deserve. And they will then contribute to our economy again, and in ways that bring foreign connections and networks, right, that will make our economy even stronger.
But you do foresee this happening for ASEAN?
Yes, and I think that's the kind of movement that
they are working towards.
Different economies in ASEAN are at different levels of development. Some are sending their people out because they invested in human capital but don't yet have the industries. Some have the industries, don't have enough human capital, so they need this. Some are uber developed already, need a lot of services that will sort of continue their growth, continue their development. So in that diversity is our strength, that we can sort of meet these challenges together and sort of help each other out. If you think of the VIPs, now Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines, which is the hotbed of production in the world and home to a strong and increasingly larger middle class and a highly skilled labor force at the heart of ASEAN, I think this is really part of what makes the bigger group also stronger, because we have these young countries with young populations. We also have countries with relatively older populations but will benefit from dealing with the young countries. And then making people sort of mobile across these borders will enable them to search for the efficient location of where their skills will be valued for the time being as the countries are adjusting.
Great. And I guess it's kind of the same benefit that will extend to entrepreneurs, and perhaps kind of finding ways that they can enter the market. I mean, will that also be easier for entrepreneurs, the integration of ASEAN?
Well, there are two ways to look at that. One is if you're an entrepreneur in Philippines and you send your product to an ASEAN economy,
which we discussed earlier. It's, if it's
that
easier
should
to
be
trade that,
straightforward,
okay.
yeah. But if you're an entrepreneur in the Philippines and you want to be an entrepreneur in Singapore or Indonesia, I think there are now options to develop that sort of mobility. I just don't know the specifics of this, but I do know that partnerships, as far as the entrepreneurs are concerned, are now forming. There are many, I guess, young people in the different ASEAN economies like Singapore looking at the Philippines for entrepreneurship opportunities. So I think that's a good thing. That matches the openness to bigger firms like conglomerates investing in each other's economies. So if you're welcoming the bigger firms, why not welcome the upstarts, right? Exactly. So I think that's a good thing. We shouldn't bias the openness towards only big, right? Having the small sort of mobile also could introduce a lot of innovation and technology transfer that could be just as important as the big firms.
Great. Thank you so much. Honestly, we learned a lot, just of kind of a lot of general ideas, and to be able to put it together and say, this is why this policy affects us, has been very useful, and I'm sure for our viewers as well. So thank you so much for your time. And that's it for Rappler Talk. I was with Ateneo School of Government Dean Ronald Mendoza. I'm Natasha Gutierrez. Thank you for joining us.